Welcome, everyone. Just want to give a few moments for all the attendees to come through into the presentation. We're very excited for our next panel. This panel is called Policing the Pandemic, Public Views of the Police Approach to Enforcement of COVID-19 Public Health Regulations in Trinidad and Tobago. So we have two wonderful presenters today from the Association of Caribbean Criminal Justice Practitioners. I'm going to have them introduce themselves and take it away and explain their presentation. So thank you so much.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Keel County. I am a MPhil PhD candidate at the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine, Trinidad and Tobago. I have an interest in data science, migration, and fear of crime. And my co-author is Dr. Wendell Wallace, Deputy Dean, Marketing, Distance and Outreach at the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine, and he's also a lecturer of criminology and criminal justice. I'm going to share my screen now to start the presentation. 1 minute. Okay, so I'll see him. If your screen share, if you'll see him.
Yes, it's up. It's sharing now. You can put it in possibly slideshow mode. Yeah.
Right. So, okay. So our presentation is entitled "Policing the Pandemic: Public Views of the Police Approach to Enforcement of COVID-19 Public Health Measures Regulations." In Trinidad and Tobago, and it's being presented by myself, Keel County, and Dr. Wendell Wallace, the Association of Caribbean Criminal Justice Practitioners. So as we would all remember, in March 2020, the world basically went into a lockdown due to the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. This upended major facets of global society, and it created numerous challenges for employees and employers. And policing was no exception to this pandemic, right? So police officers were mandated by global governments to enforce public health regulations in an effort to manage the spread of the COVID-19 disease, right, the virus. Members of the TTPS were asked, within Trinidad and Tobago, members of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service were asked to police a public health emergency by a slew of new legislation. So we look at, 1 minute, sorry. So 1 minute, guys, sorry. So we looked at this study from a context of policing. It's having a little technical, right? Right, so we looked at this study within the context of policing, right? We looked at the police community relationships in Trinidad and Tobago. And basically, traditionally in Trinidad and Tobago, there's a poor relationship between the police and the members of the public, right? It is basically known to be very pervasive, and especially within communities that have this perception of the police in a negative light. It's even worse in those communities. So we just wanted to give a snapshot of the COVID-19 and policing in Trinidad and Tobago, right? So there's already the existing poor relationship between Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, members of the public in Trinidad and Tobago. And this appeared to be exacerbated during the pandemic. And we wondered why. And there was the appearance of favoritism by the police to the minority ethnic group, which in Trinidad and Tobago be Caucasian descendant Trinidadians and Tobagonians. And there's also a perception that they are untouchable, while members of the larger, or the majority ethnic groups, which happens to be Africans and East Indians in Trinidad and Tobago, they have a perception that the police is also very hostile towards them. So despite this, individuals from all ethnic groups were also found to be in breach of the COVID-19 regulations. And this led to the Prime Minister to call on the police for equitable enforcement of the law. So the aim of the study, right? So what we wanted to know, we looked at policing the pandemic. We wanted to know what was the public view the views of the public, the approach of the police in the pandemic, and we also wanted to know about enforcement of the COVID-19 health regulations. So we wanted to know what the public thought about the police approach to the pandemic and what they also felt about the enforcement, like how was it enforced. So we wanted to know their opinions on that in Trinidad and Tobago. So our rationale. We had increased attention and concern regarding new and expanding rules of power of the police. So basically the police were given a new mandate because of the pandemic, and the public was paying attention to their new rules. And the police were also the first responders to a public health issue, not a policing issue. So the police was used to minimize the spread of the COVID-19 disease, and the perspectives of the public's experiences of policing the pandemic in Trinidad and Tobago is generally unknown. So basically, in a nutshell, we had an increased police powers through new legislation. We had increased contact with police regarding social distancing, wearing of masks, and public gatherings. So our methodology. Our study was quantitative. We had a sample size of 1,675 participants, all adults. They were all over the age of 18. We used 9 police divisions in Trinidad and Tobago. We modified variants of the Scottish Police Authority and the YouGov survey in 2020. And we had a national cross-sectional online approach. So basically, because of the pandemic, we had to use an online approach to the study. So we basically use an online platform. Right. So we had two main research questions that we wanted to answer, right? Our first research question was, what is the level of public support for police enforcement of the COVID-19 measures? And our second research question was the COVID-19 regulations perceived by the public to be equitably enforced by the police. So we had 9, so as I stated before, we had 9 policing divisions. Our sample size was 1,675. We had 62% male, 57% female, and we had 1% undisclosed, and they chose not to indicate which sex they identify with. We had 53% Africans, 28% mixed, 15% East Indians, and 1% Caucasian and Chinese each. And the age of our participants ranged from 18 to 60 plus, and the largest group of participants were persons between the ages of 31 to 40. So what are our findings, right? So the first research question, which is, what is the level of public support for police enforcement of the COVID-19 regulations? We found that while the majority of participants, which was 85%, supported police's enforcement of COVID-19 regulations, 42% of participants, while they supported the police enforcement, felt that there were incidents when the police were going too far. We also found that, with the exception with persons between the ages of 26 and 30, as age increased, support for the police enforcement of COVID-19 measures increased. And this was true for all groups except for persons between 26 and 30. We also found that persons between the ages of 18 and 25 and 26 and 30 were more likely to support the TTPS enforcement of the COVID-19 measures, but once again, they felt that in some instances, they were going too far. Persons who identified as Africans were more likely to fully support the TTPS, whereas participants who identified as East Indian and mixed, were more likely to support the TTPS, but once again felt that in some instances they were going too far. So generally to this question, there's the participants mostly support the TTPS and how they enforce the COVID-19 regulations. However, most persons also felt that there were instances where persons were going too far, well, the TTPS were going too far with the enforcement. Our second research question was, were the COVID-19 regulation perceived by the public to be equitably enforced by the police. And some of the findings, we found that the majority of respondents, 52%, felt that the COVID-19 measures were being equitably enforced by the police. With the exceptions of persons between the ages of 26 and 30, 31 and 40, were agreement with equitability of enforcement of the COVID-19 measures. So once again, we see the pattern of as age increase, agreement with the equitability of enforcement of the regulations increase. We also found that as it relates to ethnicity, Africans and persons who identified as mixed more likely to agree that the COVID-19 measures are being equitably enforced, whereas East Indians and persons who identified as others were more likely to disagree. So this was just a snapshot of our findings. We can also provide a bit more detailed information required. Right. So we also looked at the policing by divisions. And within the Southern Division, 61% of the participants supported the TTPS. With Central 55%, Port of Spain, which is the capital city, 41%, the Eastern Police Division, 53%, Northeastern Division, 52%, Western Police Division, 51%, Southwestern Police Division, 47%, Tobago, which is our sister isle, 50%, and the Northern Police Division, 49%. So if you would look at these findings, you could see that with the exception of the Port of Spain Division, almost half of the participants, almost half or more than half of the participants supported the TTPS with their enforcements of the COVID-19 regulations. Right. So the major tenets of discussion for our study, right? So the findings are consistent with most available studies examining public perceptions of policing of the pandemic. There's also widespread support for the police's enforcement of the COVID-19 regulations. And this is surprising given that previous scholarship speaks to the contrary. Because as we stated before, there's a bit of a tumultuous relationship between the public and the police in Trinidad and Tobago, especially in certain communities. The authors of this article, we contend that despite previous research indicating a lack of support for the TTPS, the present study is premised on one, the seriousness of the COVID-19, and two, that community members are willing to support the TTPS when their activities are viewed as legitimate. Right, so we're looking at now the implications of the study. So we felt that there's room for future policy here. The TTPS as an organization can seek to implement policies for the future based on the lessons learned from the police response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Right? We also felt that police legitimacy is enhanced here. So we felt that support for the enforcement, based on the findings of support for the enforcement of the regulations and the equitability of the enforcement of the regulations, felt that this can impact police legitimacy, and this should be continued post COVID-19. We also felt that there's a relationship between the police and the public. This improved relationship that the study found, we felt that this should be continued as again post COVID-19. Recommendations. So we had a few recommendations coming out of the study. We felt that the state should be funding, or state funding should be provided to facilitate further academic-led research using a cross-national longitudinal design that is Caribbean-wide and not restricted to one Caribbean country. And we also felt that further studies should be conducted on the public's perception of policing the pandemic. However, this should be done by comparing two periods within the pandemic to determine whether the views of the public might have changed over time. And this is especially applicable to Trinidad and Tobago now, because at the time of this study, I think we had a curfew. We had the curfew, but no, I don't think the curfew was implemented then. So now that we have a curfew, it would really be good for us to look and see what has changed from the results of the study, from the time that we conducted the study and to now. And so we are open to any questions that you guys may have.
Okay, thank you so much, Keel. Just before we get into the question section, Rahima, I just want to provide a brief overview of the study and just to add a couple issues. So basically, the research was conducted due to the fact that we had limited research on policing throughout the Caribbean as it relates to policing the pandemic. A wide and voracious search of literature throughout the Caribbean as it relates to the pandemic revealed that you had a research being conducted, but most of the research that were conducted looked at the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the education system. In fact, that's quite understandable in that, I think more people have been impacted based on the pandemic when you look at the educational system. So we decided that we would look at how policing was impacted and what are the public perception of the level of equitability of enforcement. An important aspect, an important facet of the study is that when compared to other jurisdictions, this study is one of a few that looked at an entire police jurisdiction. In fact, we looked at Trinidad and Tobago in its entirety by using the 9 police divisions. And the police divisions are similar to what people may refer to as precincts or constituents in other jurisdictions. So we looked at the 9 police jurisdictions throughout Trinidad and Tobago. As I said, it's one of the few studies that looked at an entire police jurisdiction. In other studies, you found that some researchers looked at specific jurisdictions, or they look at specific police geographical areas rather than looking at the entire jurisdiction. So this study in itself, it's quite novel. The implications for the study looks at, as my presenter, as Ms. Conti said, it looks at policy, police legitimacy, but importantly, the implications look at, okay, what is the future of that relationship post-pandemic? And hopefully, you're hoping that there is an improved relationship between the police and the public emanating from this research, and that would continue after the pandemic has ended. Now, one major weakness of the study has to do with the fact that we only used we used a national online approach. Unfortunately, based on the times that we're living in, the historic time and the time that the study was conducted, we were forced to use that method of approach. We were forced to use the online approach. Indeed, it would not have been the best approach to use the online approach, in that what online approaches does is that you tend to have a particular type of participants. More often than not, with online research, what you find is people in the middle to upper levels of society, they tend to participate at the behest of at the behest, but to the exclusion of those at the lower levels of society. And that was a limitation of our study, but as I mentioned, it had to do with the fact that we were operating in pandemic times, and a further research or previous research indicated that it would not have been a worthy venture to use the face-to-face approach. As my co-presenter mentioned, I'm Dr. Wendell Wallace, and I was the lead researcher on the project. Ms. Keel County is, she's one of my students, and she worked as the secondary researcher, but the research was conducted by both of us. However, Ms. County was tasked with the responsibility of presenting, and I'm here to just back up to summarize, to present an overview, and hopefully to answer any questions that you may have, the audience may have, as it relates to the presentation. So Ms. Kongti and I will be addressing the questions that the panelists may have. So this brings us to the end of our presentation.
Wonderful, thank you so much. And we have several questions. So the first question, especially looking at, you had mentioned earlier, thinking about how these relationships would look going forward. The first question from Rahul is, what would be some solutions for creating friendly relationships between citizens and police?
All right, so that's a good question, and thanks, Rahul, for that question. There are a host of things that can be done. From Trinidad and Tobago's perspective, my suggestion is to have the police and the community work a bit closer, but certainly that must stem from the police itself. In fact, I don't want to say that we've had a change in commissioner of police, because we in effect, we do not have a commissioner of police in the substantive rank. But the accounting officer for the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service has recently implemented a community outreach project. And that in itself seeks to draw the community closer to the police. And I think that that's a wonderful way. That's a step in the right direction. So to Rahul, that's one of the ways. And to me, that's the major way of bringing the police into closer contact with the public. I'm also suggesting that we need to move policing from within the police stations, from within the buildings, to a situation where police officers are now more into the community. Now, for those of you who understand the context of policing in the Caribbean, and specifically Trinidad and Tobago, our form of policing was premised on the British colonial model, or the traditional model, where people come to the station and they lodge reports. So police officers are basically within the station, whereas in the democratic model of policing that's used in England, you find that the police officers are more out into the communities. And with that approach, they tend to see the causal factors of crime and community decay. So I am a supporter of moving police officers out of the police stations and into the community. I'm saying that not in a literal sense, but we need to have more police officers on the beat and in the communities, rather than the majority of police officers remaining within the police stations.
Thank you very much for explaining that and offering your insight on this issue. We have another set of questions actually from another attendee. Their name is Karen. They said, very good presentation. Did your study determine why the capital city had the least support for the enforcement by the police?
Okay, so I'll take that question, and Keel can feel free to chime in at any point in time. I don't want to appear as though I'm monopolizing, but the study did not seek to elicit information as to why the support, or why the respondents from the capital city was the lowest for the entire study and for the 9 police divisions. However, my response to that, or just to add, is that as a researcher, I sort of expected that we would have a low response rate from the Port of Spain division. Part of that is premised on the fact that, as Pino and Johnson said, the relationship between police and the communities throughout Trinidad and Tobago, there's a sort of pervasive relationship. It's a weak relationship, but that relationship is particularly weaker in the ghettoized communities that surround Port of Spain. So as a researcher, you go into your research with a blank slate, a clean slate, expecting the best results and the best turnout, best participation from your respondents. But in other words, you want to conduct your research from a neutral perspective. And that's what we did. And that's why we used the 9 police divisions within Trinidad and Tobago. However, as I said, based on previous research conducted by Pino and Johnson, as well as research conducted by myself, I was aware of the fact that, you know, you have these poor relationships between particular communities in Trinidad and Tobago and the police. And therefore, I suspected that we would have gotten a lower response. And, you know, that was borne out in actuality by the level of response that we got, showing that the lowest number of responses actually came from the Port of Spain division. So it's a very good question I think by Karen. It's a very good question, but that's the response. That's the response to Karen's question.
Great. Karen actually had another follow-up question, which was, why did the Southern Division have the most support for the enforcement of the COVID regulations?
All right. Keel, you want to attempt this, or you would like me to answer?
I could say something and then you could add in. I know that right now the southern part of Trinidad and Tobago, Trinidad, we have a high COVID rate right now. In fact, well, what do they call that? The COVID infection rates, active cases, right? So the number of cases in the southern division or the southern part of the country is actually high. So it could be because they were more afraid of infected or whatever it is that caused them to be more in support of the TTPS regulations. They view this as protecting themselves some other way. I don't know if you want to add in, Dr. Wallace.
Well, I'm also of the view that the rural areas, I saw a higher response rate in the rural areas, but I also saw higher support in the rural areas as well. And my response would be premised on previous research as well. Previous research in Trinidad and Tobago has shown that you have greater support for police activities in the rural areas, or let me not say rural, but possibly in the semi-urban areas, semi-urban and more rural areas, right? The urban areas tend to have less support for police activities. And again, this is borne out in the international literature that shows policing in the rural areas tend to adopt a slightly different approach. Policing in the rural or in the semi-urban and rural approach, rural communities tend to have a sort of distinct community-based interactions, whereas in the urban cities, it's more of a sort of disjunctive sort of relationship. And therefore, in the rural areas, you tend to have more support and more compliance. And even studies on police legitimacy tends to show in the semi-urban and in the rural areas, again, higher levels of legitimacy, higher levels of support for police activities. And I think this impacted our study because the study wasn't conducted in a vacuum. The study is conducted within a global perspective. And again, the results were borne out by that global perspective. So I hope this answers Karen's question.
Yeah, she actually added a follow-up question, which was quoting, this is what she wrote, then could you advance a reason why the Southwestern Division support was also so low, much lower than Southern Division, although they are not really considered ghettoized?
Right. The Southwestern Division attracted a low support for the police conduct as it relates to the enforcement of COVID-19 regulations. Now, my response is premised on conjecture and not necessarily facts, because we didn't distill the data into looking at the reasons behind the responses. What I can see is that in a study that is presently being conducted at this time, it actually shows that the Southwestern Division, or that people in the Southwestern Police Division, they feel particularly impacted by the police response. And part of it has to do with the fact that in the Southwestern region, the Southwestern Police Division, the data points to the fact that you have the Southwestern Police Division appears to be the gateway for entry of illegal migrants into Trinidad and Tobago. That's what the data is showing. And as a result, the police appears to be enforcing the law in the Southwestern Division in a particular manner that appears to be injurious to the activities of those persons in that community. And I'm saying that it's more conjecture because the study has not been completed, but it's pointing to that the people in that area will not support the police enforcement because it's actually impacting on some of their illegal/financial activities in that police division. So again, I am hoping that that our responses that they have answered the question posed by Karen.
Yes, she responded, "Thank you so much for your responses. I fully understand. Well done." She did actually have one related question, final question, which is, how can I join the Association of Caribbean Criminal Justice Practitioners? I am a member of the police service. Would the ACCJP undertake to do other policing studies?
All right, so I'll again ask my co-presenter, Ms. Conti, to say a few words, and then I'll back her up.
The persons can join the ACCJP via our Facebook page. We have a link that takes you directly to a form to fill out there. Once you fill out the form, we would screen it and we would let you know if you have been accepted, if you have not been accepted. I also think it's highly likely that the ACCJP will be doing follow-up research in policing, especially given the findings of this study and the implications that it will have for future research. I mean, it's very likely that we would do more studies.
Right, so I'd like to also mention that, as indicated by my co-presenter, Ms. Conti, the study was conducted under the auspices of the Association for Caribbean Criminal Justice Practitioners. And this is an organization that has the interest of criminal justice practitioners throughout the region. We are not only limited to the Caribbean, we have persons outside of the Caribbean who are members of the organization. And we decided that it would be beneficial to conduct such research. So the research was not conducted whilst we are members, whilst I'm a lecturer at the University of the West Indies and Keel is a student here. We didn't conduct the research from a university perspective. We conducted it based on our membership in the Association of Caribbean Criminal Justice Practitioners. And I think that this is a plus for the organization. This is one of the few times that you are seeing civic groups actually coming out and conducting research rather than leaving the research solely for universities. And I think that that's the direction that organizations such as ours should be moving. And indeed, to strengthen the point made by Ms. Conti, whilst this may be the first research conducted by the organization, from where I sit, I certainly don't think that it's the last, and we will be encouraging our members to not only conduct research, but to present the findings at conferences such as this. And we're very much grateful to the organizers of this conference for always allowing us as individuals from an under-researched, traditionally under-researched area, for allowing us to present our findings to a global audience. As it relates to membership, you look for us on Facebook, as Ms. Conti said. you send your membership form, and we're quite willing to accept people. So I know the conference is being broadcasted globally. So we're looking forward to having persons, Danielle and Gutierrez and Rahima and others join the Association of Caribbean Criminal Justice Practitioners.
Thank you so much. We're very grateful to have you here. We do have one more question, if you don't mind. This question is from Chantel, and it starts with, "Good afternoon, well done. Can you please indicate how, quote unquote, too far was in your results was defined?"
All right. So let me take that question. We modeled the research on the YouGov and the Scottish government's example using their questionnaire in looking at, okay, what are the public's perception? And going too far simply meant that they went beyond, standard policing practices. In other words, you should not be doing a public health task, because the pandemic is not a policing task. So yes, that they were satisfied that the police officers, that they are contented with the task that they're doing, but they're going too far. In other words, rather than giving persons a ticket, they could have simply been using warnings, etc., rather than giving people tickets and having them paying a fine in the context of the pandemic and people losing their jobs, etc., etc. So that's what we looked at, and that is what was meant by they doing the job, but they're going a bit too far. So again, hoping that answers Chantel's question.
Wonderful, thank you so much. I don't see a follow-up question from her. I currently don't have any more questions in queue. That was a very active question and answer session. Very grateful for that. Do you have any other last comments you'd like to make before we wrap up our session?
Keel?
No, not really. I'm just grateful for the opportunity presented today. So that's it for me, really.
And so Rahima, thanks to the ICC for having us. Thanks to the presenters, Keel and myself, we are really grateful for the opportunity. We also want to thank Karen and Chantel, as well as Rahul, for the questions that they have posed. And our contact information, it's on the screen. Feel free to reach out to me, to myself. Feel free to reach out to Keel if you have any questions regarding the study. We are quite willing and we are quite able to provide further answers as it relates to the study.
Wonderful. Thank you so much again for sharing your research. We really appreciate your time, all your hard work, and we are grateful again for you agreeing to be a part of this presentation. So thank you so much for your time, and I hope you both have a wonderful day. Thank you again, and thank you to all our attendees as well.
Okay.